You can't hear it. You can see it, but it's there beneath the noise, beneath the hustle, beneath the mask of who you've trained yourself to be. It's not loud. It doesn't scream. It whispers. It whispers every time you look in the mirror and don't know what you're looking for. Every time you achieve something and feel nothing. Every time you love someone and secretly wait for them to leave. Every time you're alone and the silence feels more like judgment than peace. It's not the kind of pain that breaks you. It's the kind that shapes you, like a scar on the architecture of your identity hidden in plain sight, carved before you even knew what love or trust meant, before you knew what it meant to stand tall, before you even knew how to ask why. The father wound, it's not always abuse. Sometimes it's absence. Sometimes it's distance. Sometimes it's presence without connection. Sometimes it's the cold silence of a man who never learned to say, "I'm proud of you." And it changes everything, because the boy looks to the father, not just for protection, but for reflection. He looks into the eyes of the man who made him, hoping to see who he could become. But when that gaze is empty, hard, or absent, he doesn't just feel forgotten. He feels invisible. And when a boy grows up feeling invisible, he becomes a man who performs, a man who chases, a man who pretends to be strong, pretends to be confident, pretends he doesn't care. He builds muscles over the ache. He builds empires over the emptiness. He builds personas over the boy who still just wants to hear, "You are enough." This is not weakness. This is history. This is legacy. This is generational pain, echoing through time past from father to son, like an unspoken curse. And the tragedy? Most men never speak of it, because they were taught that pain is weakness. That to be a man is to feel nothing. To cry is to collapse. To admit you needed a father is to admit you're broken. But the opposite is true. To admit the wound is the beginning of the healing. To speak the unspeakable is the beginning of power. To face the father wound is to stop being a shadow and become a man. Because here's the truth, they don't tell you. If you don't face your father wound, you become it. You either mirror him or rebel against him, but either way, you're still orbiting around the gravity of a man who never truly taught you how to be whole. And so you try to prove you're better, or you try to earn his love in every woman you meet. Or you try to punish yourself for being a son he couldn't accept. You try to become everything he wasn't, only to realize you've lost yourself in the process. You overcorrect. You underfunction. You rage. You withdraw. You detach. Because the father wound doesn't just live in memory. It lives in posture, in tone, in how you show up when life punches you in the gut, in how you react to love, discipline, ambition, failure, silence. The sins of the fathers are visited upon the children, Scripture says, but not as punishment, as inheritance, until you break the pattern, not by hating your father, not by blaming him, but by understanding that he too was a son, a wounded son, a frightened son, a man who perhaps never had a father present enough to show him how to hold space for another life. And the moment you realize this, the fracture in your soul doesn't disappear, but it begins to speak, not in shame, not in rage, but in revelation, because now you see the pain was not there to destroy you. It was there to awaken you, to call you into a rite of passage that most men never take, the path from wounded son to healed father. You don't need children to take that path. You need courage. The courage to look inward and see where your masculinity was distorted. The courage to sit with the ache without numbing it. The courage to stop performing, stop hiding, stop faking strength, and start building real inner weight. This is not about fixing the past. You can't. This is about reclaiming what the past tried to steal. The integrity of your soul, the sacred geometry of your manhood, the clarity of knowing who you are when the world stops applauding. This is the work that terrifies weak men, because it's not glamorous. It won't get you likes. It won't make you the loudest in the room, but it will make you true. And when you become true, when your inner structure is no longer built from broken expectations and silent shame, you become indestructible. Because you no longer need to prove anything. You simply are. Still, grounded, unmoved. You stop seeking the Father outside because you become Him inside. The Father who doesn't abandon, the Father who listens, the Father who disciplines without destroying, the Father who leads without controlling, the Father who looks into the eyes of His own pain and says, "It ends with me." That's what the world needs. Not more noise, not more performative strength, not more empty masculinity wrapped in ego and fear. It needs men who have gone into the belly of their own father wound and emerged reborn. Not just healed, but forged. Men who don't run from their emotions, but master them. Men who don't weaponize their past, but rewrite it. Men who no longer need the world to tell them who they are, because they've already met the man beneath the mask. And in that moment, something sacred happens. The fracture becomes a foundation. The silence becomes a sanctuary. And the wound becomes a weapon. Not a weapon that harms, but one that protects. Protecte vision, protecte love, protecte legacy. Because once you've healed the wound of the Father, you are no longer a son seeking permission. You are a man carrying destiny. Because revelation without reconstruction is just emotional theater. You've stared into the abyss, but if you don't start laying bricks, the abyss will stare back forever. This is where most fall. They taste awareness, they read the quotes, they have the conversations, they admit the pain, but then nothing. They collapse into intellectual comfort, and the wound becomes an identity. You weren't meant to admire healing, you were meant to live it. You want to rise? Then begin with structure, not just affirmations, order, because order is what the wounded soul has never known. Establish non-negotiables, form a spine rituals that do not bend under pressure. Wake up at the same time, move your body, clean your space, confront your addictions, speak only what aligns, think only what serves. Because order is not restriction, it is resurrection. A man without order is a man waiting to fall back into chaos. He becomes reactive, emotional, easily manipulated by distraction, a leaf tossed in a storm. But a man of order, he becomes a pillar, not perfect, but unmoved. When a man has discipline, he has time. When a man has time, he has clarity. And when a man has clarity, he remembers his assignment. And don't confuse busyness with purpose. One is noise, the other is melody. The healed man moves with melody. He doesn't chase, he doesn't force, he doesn't over-explain, because his life is now tuned to something higher than performance. He is governed by principle. This is where your new identity begins, not in the external victories, but in the alignment. If your soul is misaligned, no amount of money, sex, status, or praise will anchor you. But when you are aligned, when your thoughts, actions, emotions, and values point in the same direction, you become untouchable. Men follow you. Women respect you. Time bends for you. Not because you are special, but because you have become integrated. And integration is power. Power that doesn't scream. Power that radiates. And now it's time to build something eternal. Not a brand, not a following, a lineage. A life so rooted in self-respect that it outlives your body. A life that teaches not with words, but with presence. That's the real legacy. Not what they say when you die, but what they become because you lived. But to build that, really build it, you must destroy the part of you still waiting to be rescued. No one is coming. No mentor, no partner, no book, no God in the sky waving a magic wand. You are the miracle. You are the one who breaks the pattern. You are the one who steps out of the river of history and says the pain stops here. Couldn't. And that means you must become ruthlessly aware of what no longer fits. You must cut out the behaviors, the people, the habits, the fantasies that keep you small, not out of hatred, but out of honor. The man who honors his life does not allow leeches to stay attached. He is not afraid to disappoint people. He is not afraid to be misunderstood. He is not afraid to walk alone, because he knows that every step taken in alignment with truth is a step into divine territory. And once a man begins walking with God, not just in belief, but in discipline, the war is already won, even in the dark, even when he's tired, even when no one claps. He walks anyway, because he's not walking for applause, he's walking for freedom. He knows the path is narrow, but it is his. And only the man who claims his own path through blood, through sweat, through fire gets to call himself king. But even kings must learn to bow, not to the world, not to fear, but to something far more dangerous, to the ego reality. Because once the illusions are stripped, once the wounds are confronted, once the structure is built, what remains is the raw terrain of life itself, not filtered, not curated, just real. The way the light hits the trees in the morning, the way silence stretches between words when no one needs to perform, the weight of a choice made in solitude, no audience, no validation, just the quiet echo of responsibility. This is where your soul either matures or escapes. Because for most men, facing life as it is too much. So they distract, they compare, they construct fantasies of what should be, and they miss what is. But the healed man, the man forged through pain and order, he sees through it all. He doesn't fight life. He engages it. He sits with the grief of knowing he can't change the past. He accepts it. He doesn't romanticize the future. He earns it. He meets the moment without filters, without projections, without the need to label it good or bad. Because the real power lies in presence, not the fake spiritual kind, the kind that's rooted in the body, in breath, in stillness, in being exactly where you are and owning it without needing to be anywhere else. Most people run from the present because they're ashamed of it. But when you've walked through hell and chosen truth over comfort, the present becomes sacred ground. This moment, this quiet, unremarkable sliver of time is where eternity unfolds. It's where you speak not because you want to be heard, but because your words carry weight. It's where you make decisions not out of panic or projection, but from a center that cannot be shaken. It's where you begin to realize you don't need to be seen to matter, because you've become whole in the invisible. And it's in that invisible place that your true authority is born. Not authority given by others, not authority bought with status. Authority that radiates from the marrow, the kind that enters a room and says nothing but shifts the air. Because that's what happens when a man no longer needs to perform. He becomes undeniable. And from that place, he no longer waits for opportunity. He creates it. He no longer begs for direction. He embodies it. He no longer obsesses over legacy. He becomes it. Not by shouting louder, but by showing up again and again and again with the same unbreakable integrity, whether the world is watching or not. Because he's not building a moment. He's building a mythos, a rhythm so consistent, so aligned, so pure that it carves a trail through history even after he's gone. And all of it started with a fracture, a quiet break in the soul no one else could see, a silence inherited through blood, a wound that didn't shout but whispered until the whisper became a call, and the call became a war cry, and the war cry became a vow. It ends with me, it begins with me, and now there is no going back, because now you've crossed the threshold. There's no applause here, no spotlight, just you, the road, and the weight of everything you said you would become. This is the terrain of men who keep their promises when no one is watching, where your word becomes law, not because anyone enforces it, but because you do. And this is where most turn back, right here, because they discover something darker than pain boredom. Not the boredom of inactivity, the boredom of discipline, the slow, unglamorous grind of repetition, the quiet battles that no one cheers for, the silence between milestones where your only reward is that you did not quit. This is where you learn the difference between passion and commitment. Passion is loud, commitment is quiet. Passion comes and goes. Commitment kneels every morning at the altar of discipline and says, again and again and again, you want peace, then earn it. You want clarity, then suffer for it. Because wisdom is not gifted. It's extracted from failure, from restraint, from 1,000 silent yeses when everything in you screamed no. The modern world has sold you a lie that transformation is about excitement, that your growth will be dramatic, shareable, sexy. But transformation is not a performance. It is demolition, and then brick by brick, resurrection. You lose the friends who loved your wounds. You lose the habits that gave you escape. You lose the false identities you wore like armor. And for a moment you will feel naked. But eventually the nakedness becomes freedom. And the freedom becomes power. Because the man who needs nothing to validate him is the most powerful force alive. Not because he dominates others, but because he is no longer dominated by himself. Not by his urges. Not by his need to be understood. Not by his past, or his fears, or his hunger for validation. He has become master of what once ruled him. He has walked into the room of his darkest self and stayed, not to fight it, not to fix it, but to witness it, integrate it, lead it. That's what Jung meant when he said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious, quote. And when that darkness is brought to light, not erased, not shamed, but understood, you stop pretending to be good, and you start becoming whole. And that wholeness, it changes everything. You stop needing every room to like you. You stop chasing every woman to feel worthy. You stop breaking your back to be seen because you see yourself. And from that place, finally, quietly, fully, you begin to build. Not from pain, not from fear, but from truth. The truth that you were never broken. You were unfinished. And now finally, you're ready to become complete. Now the real question emerges, what will you build with the truth? Because knowing it isn't enough. Feeling it isn't enough. Even healing isn't the end. It's the beginning of becoming the kind of man whose presence reshapes rooms, recalibrates others, not because of volume, but because of density. You see, the healed man carries weight, not emotional baggage, not unresolved anger, spiritual mass. Soul gravity, he no longer reacts, he responds, he no longer rushes, he moves with rhythm, he no longer conforms, he carves reality. And this carving begins with intention. He doesn't fill time, he directs it, he doesn't consume, he creates. He doesn't beg for love, he embodies it. When he speaks, his words don't entertain, they shape, they frame, they cut through illusion. And more than that, his life becomes a template. Not a sermon, a signal, a living architecture of what's possible when a man chooses to stop outsourcing his soul. He becomes dangerous not to the righteous, but to every lie the world has taught men to swallow. And in his presence, something terrifying happens to those still asleep. They begin to wake up, not because he forces them, but because truth provokes transformation. That's why your wholeness matters. Not for applause, not for image, but because every inch you rise, others remember they can too. This is not about becoming a teacher. It's about becoming an example. Not one who has all the answers, but one who has wrestled with the real questions and emerged with scarred hands and clean eyes. One who has buried the illusion of perfection and embraced the divine mess of becoming. One who understands that there is no final form, only deeper layers of embodiment, and from that embodiment comes vision, not a dream, a directive, a flame that does not flicker with doubt or desire for praise. A flame that burns clean because it is lit by purpose and fanned by conviction. And that conviction, it is not for sale. It cannot be seduced by trend, fear, comfort, or crowd. It stands, it walks, it leads, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard, because the man who has walked through the fracture, who has stared into the abyss and made it speak, who has chosen clarity over numbness, structure over chaos, wholeness over performance, that man no longer needs to be told what to do. He already knows, because his life now echoes something ancient, something beyond culture, beyond persona, beyond even time. His life echoes God. So he builds not in haste, not in hunger, but with reverence. Every word spoken is a brick, every choice a beam, every sacrifice a cornerstone, every silence mortar holding something sacred together. He doesn't build to impress, he builds to contain the divine. Because once you've encountered the raw, wordless power of wholeness, once you've stood in your own presence without flinching, without performing, without collapsing, you understand that your very life is a temple, not a showroom, not a stage, a sanctuary, and sanctuaries demand precision. The healed man becomes precise, precise with time, precise with words, precise with relationships, not cold but calibrated. He knows what fits and what fractures. He sees through noise and recognizes signal. He recognizes counterfeit intimacy in a glance. He hears manipulation in a compliment. He feels misalignment in the spaces most men get lost, because his nervous system is no longer hijacked by chaos. It's been retuned to truth. He's not unfeeling, he's unedited. He doesn't seek pleasure for escape, he seeks it for expansion. He doesn't fear pain, he listens to it. Pain becomes data. Joy becomes compass. Stillness becomes strategy. And from this vantage point, purpose becomes practical. It's not abstract. It's encoded in the hour, the room, the posture of each interaction. Purpose isn't a destination, it's precision in motion. It's being the exact man the moment requires without losing the thread of who you are. You don't have to be everything. You just have to be true. True to the moment. True to the code. True to the architecture forged in fire. And from that truth, everything becomes simpler. You no longer hustle for identity. You inhabit it. You no longer explain your values. You embody them. You no longer fear loss because you no longer confuse possession with power. And it's in that simplicity that your impact multiplies, because the man who is integrated is rare. Rare enough to be undeniable. Rare enough to magnetize others into their own remembrance. Rare enough to change the spiritual climate of a room just by walking in. Not by being loud, but by being real. And now, this is where it all converges. Not in a moment of applause, not in some cinematic crescendo, but right here in the quiet realization that the man you were chasing was never out there. He was beneath the rubble, beneath the projections, beneath the guilt, beneath the armor you mistook for strength. He was always waiting, not to be discovered, but to be chosen. And now you choose him, not as a fantasy, but as a foundation. You choose to stop performing. You choose to stop bleeding for approval. You choose to stop handing out keys to your kingdom in exchange for crumbs of validation. You choose weight over image, structure over chaos, fear over numbness. You choose to live in truth even when it costs you comfort, even when it costs you company, even when it costs you everything that once felt like home. Because now you understand what you lose in comfort, you gain in consecration. And the man who is consecrated, he no longer walks as a son of fracture. He walks as a father of legacy. He does not repeat cycles. He ends them. He does not echo the pain. He rewrites the sound. He does not bow to history. He builds kingdoms from its ashes. Because the father wound was never your final story. It was the opening note, a sacred rupture, a divine interruption, a whisper that turned into a roar. Wake up, and now you are awake. No longer broken, built, bound, becoming, and from this moment forward, you are not the result of what was done to you. You are the revelation of what was forged through you. Now go, walk as one who has seen the shadow. Walk as one who carries the flame. Walk as one who does not fear the silence. Because the world no longer needs another wounded son trying to be a man. It needs a man who rose, a man who became whole, a man who did the unthinkable. He forgave the wound. He faced the fire, and he became the father he never had.